Stuka Joe here. Today we're going to take a look at the Battle of Blenheim 1704. This is a game by Legion Wargames, designed by Steve Pohl, and this is the first of a series of games that will be part of the 7-hex system. This is a tactical system in which the map is divided into areas. And the areas have the shape of clusters of 7 hexes, 1 central hex, and 6 surrounding hexes. In this system, the specific deployment of units in hexes within an area denotes either an offensive stance or defensive stance. And we will take a look at how that works. First, we'll take a look at the components, what the numbers on the counters mean, the player aids, the map, and then we will go through an extended example of play which was facilitated to me by the game's designer, Steve Pohl, so that you can get an idea of how the mechanics of this 7-hex system work. Okay, here we see a typical infantry unit of Modifiers, and you see it is a French unit denoted by the blue background. The fleur de lis symbol, which is yellow, denotes that it belongs to the formation commanded by Marshal de Tallard. And you see he has the same colored fleur de lis in his upper left corner. In the right top corner, in a black box, you have a number 3. That is the occupancy factor. It's basically a measure of how much space that unit occupies in an area. And the number 5 is the unit's combat strength. There's also cavalry in the game, like this unit, which belongs to the formation with the blue fleur de lis. It has the same ratings, occupancy rating of 3, combat strength of 4. Now the blue fleur de lis denotes that this unit belongs to the formation commanded by Marshal de Marsan. And the third type is artillery, as this Franco-Bavarian artillery unit, the Franco-Bavarian flag, is denoted in the top leftmost corner. And Franco-Bavarian units in this game are commanded by the Elector of Bavaria. Now, artillery units have various combat factors depending on their positioning in a specific hex and whether they're attacking or defending. If an artillery unit is in an outer hex and it is defending, its combat factor will be the one shown at the left, which in this case is 1. If the artillery unit is attacking from a central hex in support of either infantry or cavalry, then its combat factor will be the number in the middle, that is 2. And if it is defending from a central hex, then its combat factor will be the rightmost number, in this case 3. Well, by now you're probably asking, well, what's the use of placing artillery units in outer hexes if their defense is going to be that paltry 1? Well, there is another reason to place artillery units there in the outer hexes, and it is so that they can conduct ranged fire. Only artillery units that are in outer hexes can conduct ranged fire, and ranged fire is a sort of defensive fire that artillery units can conduct during the opposing player's turn. So if you have a pretty good idea that an enemy attack is coming your way, it may be a good idea to place nearby artillery units so that they can soften up the attack. If you expect an imminent attack on your area, or you want to attack with infantry and cavalry, then the artillery unit should be in the central hex. Now, this game is played in turns, and each turn has 5 phases. One player goes first. That will be the active player, and then the other player takes his turn. And in each of a player's turn, there are 5 phases. The strategic movement phase, In this phase, a player may move his units which are in the same area as a commander or adjacent to an area containing a commander. So the command units are important in the sense of where they are placed, because their position at the beginning of the turn will determine which units are eligible for strategic movement. And there's 3 types of strategic movement, which we will cover. Next comes the ranged fire phase, and here is where the non-active player can fire with his artillery units that are placed in outer hexes. Next comes the orders, tactical movement, and combat phase. Yes, all those 3 things at once, because this game uses an orders system. And you have to roll a die after having given the order to see if the formation will carry out the order, and if it carries out the order or not depends on that die roll. Now, if a formation successfully carries out an order, then you can roll for another formation to carry out another order, but there's a -1 die roll that will negatively impact whether the order is carried out. So the more times you roll for orders, the less likely that it will be carried out. And after you fail one of these order die rolls, then you move on to the next phase, which is the morale phase. During the morale phase, disrupted units of the active player that are in areas containing a command unit now may rally to full strength. And there's also a morale test that has to be performed on disrupted units which are adjacent to good order enemy units. And those disrupted units that fail the morale test are routed and removed from play. And the last phase is the command unit movement phase, and this is the only instance in which command units can move in the game. And as stated before, where they are placed, in the area that they are placed, will be important to determine strategic movement and also rally opportunities. In this game, units cannot enter marsh or woods hexes. Also, a unit that is in an area cannot move or attack into an adjacent area unless one or both of the 2 outer hexes through which it must travel do not comprise marsh or woods and is adjacent to a hex in the destination area which similarly does not comprise marsh or woods. So in this example, this infantry unit could move or attack into 0509. It could also move or attack into 0609, as well as into 0709, and also 0708. And it could also move or attack into 0607. But it cannot move or attack into 0508. You see the 2 outer hexes that are adjacent to that area are marsh terrain. There's a series of modifiers to the attack and defense value that we will take a look at now. In this game, the British units, which are signified by the cross of George symbol in the top left-hand corner, are what is known as platoon firers. Platoon firers have a certain advantage. These are battalions which 1/3 is firing while another third is loading and the other third is already loaded. So they can deliver a more continuous volume of fire, and that is reflected by a +2 die roll modifier to the attack value on a per unit basis. Now in this game, some of the infantry units, like this French infantry unit, have battalion guns embedded within the unit, as shown by the artillery symbol. present there. This has an effect on the attack and defense value also, that there is a +1 die roll modifier on a per unit basis. As to victory conditions in this game, the side which first eliminates 12 enemy infantry and or cavalry units and occupies 2 of the following villages wins: Blenheim, Oberglauheim, and or Lutzingen. If victory is not achieved beforehand, the game is won by the side which at the end of turn 15 occupies at least 2 of the villages that we mentioned before. This is an area game, and there are limits on the number of units you may place in each area. And the way the game handles that is by using the concept of occupancy factors. And we stated that those occupancy factors are expressed as a number encased in a black box on the top right-hand corner of the counter. Here we see area 502. It has 3 units. In the center hex, it has a cavalry unit with an occupancy factor of 3. Then in the topmost hex, it has 2 units. The unit beneath the artillery unit is an infantry unit with 3 occupancy factors, and the artillery unit has an occupancy factor rating of 0. The limit in this game per area is 6 occupancy factors, so you can see that this area is occupied to the fullest limit. Now here we see area 0102. It has a total of 4 woods hexes, and in this game, any area that has 4 woods hexes or 4 marsh hexes affects the occupancy limits of units that can be placed there. And the effect that it has is that each unit's occupancy factor will be increased by 1. So this Austrian infantry unit, which normally has an occupancy factor of 3, has now 4 occupancy factors, and that means that the allied player could place in that area 2 more occupancy factors. So let's say they place that artillery unit in one of the outer hexes, and remember that you may not place any units in any woods or marsh hexes. So this particular area has only 3 available hexes where to place units. So that artillery unit now has an occupancy factor rating of 1 because of the modification. So there's a total now of 5 occupancy factors in that particular area. So the first phase of the turn is the strategic movement phase, and only undisrupted cavalry and infantry units that are in the same area as their commander or in an adjacent area can move during this phase. The player aid card has a strategic movement type table. There's 3 types of strategic movement. Artillery can only use type C. Under type A strategic movement, this is movement only along roads and where the units do not start in or enter any area which is adjacent to an area containing an enemy unit. Under this type of movement, infantry can move up to 4 areas, cavalry up to 8, and command units up to 10 areas. But remember, command units only move in the 5th phase, which is the command movement phase. There's also type B strategic movement. Here, cavalry can move up to 4 areas and infantry up to 2, and units can move into but not leave an area immediately adjacent to an enemy unit. Again, command units using this type of movement can move up to 6 areas during their specific movement phase. And then the last type of strategic movement is type C, which is called redeployment. Here, the units may move between hexes within their current area, including splitting or combining stacks. And it's always good to remember that disrupted units cannot deploy, but units in good order in a different stack can do so. Now, cavalry and infantry units, which are making a strategic move from one area to another, have to begin the move in the central hex of the initial area and end in the central hex of the destination area. So let's take a look now at an example of strategic movement. For a unit to be eligible to move by strategic movement, it has to be in the same area or adjacent to its command unit. So the Allies choose the 2 cavalry units that are in area 0206, which is adjacent to the area where Prince Eugene of Savoy is. And the topmost cavalry unit moves 2 areas to area 405. Notice that because it entered an area which is adjacent to enemy units, it has to stop there. The other cavalry unit will move 3 areas, and remember the maximum that Type B strategic movement units can move, cavalry units can move is 4, so it will move 3 areas to area 0506, and it has to stop there because of the presence of enemy units in adjacent areas. Now the next strategic move will be made by the 2 cavalry units that occupy the same area as Prince Eugene. So each of the units will move a total of 3 areas to 0403, where they must stop because of the presence of enemy units in adjacent areas. Next, we'll move the 2 units that are in area 0204. The first infantry unit will move to 0305, and the second infantry unit will move 2 areas to 0405 to join the cavalry unit that previously moved there. And that is all the strategic movement that can be done with the units belonging to Prince Eugene of Savoy. All units that were adjacent to him or in his area have moved via strategic movement. Of course, in a regular game, we would proceed with strategic movement now for the units of the Duke of Marlborough, but in this extended example of play, we will now move to the next phase, which is the ranged fire phase. And again, this phase is performed by the non-active player. In this case, it would be the Franco-Bavarian player. In the ranged fire phase, each artillery unit fires independently at an area that contains an enemy combat unit or units, and the fire has to be within the arc that begins with the 2 areas immediately adjacent to the outer hex where the artillery unit is deployed. And the maximum range depends on the size of the cannon of the battery that is firing, and is reflected by the weight of the shot printed on the counter. Now, to give you an idea of the implications of range fire, the defending artillery, which is deployed in outer hexes, may fire at targets that are a specific number of areas distant, depending on the type of artillery that is firing. For example, 3 or 4 pounder guns can fire at targets that are 2 areas distant. So let's suppose that this artillery unit that we have would be a 3 or 4 pounder. It could fire into areas 1104, 1105, or 1003, 1004, and 1005. Now, artillery units that are 6 or 8 pounders may fire up to 3 areas distant. So if that were the case with this artillery unit, it could also fire into 903, 904, 905, and 906. And if this artillery artillery unit would be a 12 or 16 pounder, in this case it is a 12 pounder, it could fire up to 4 areas away, so that would include now 802, 803, 804, 805, and 806. Now, having designated the target area, the non-active player rolls 2d6 and cross-reference the result against the ranged fire hit table to determine whether a hit has been scored on an enemy unit, and a hit results in the target unit being disrupted, or if already disrupted, being eliminated. So here we see the ranged fire hit table, and depending on the weight of the shot of the firing unit is the range upon which it can fire. Let's say that a 12-pounder unit is firing. 12 pounders have a maximum range of 4 areas. And let's say that the target unit is 2 areas away from the firing artillery unit. So the artillery unit would roll 2d6 and would need 9 or more to score a hit. So here we see 2 artillery units of the Franco-Bavarians that are eligible to fire because they are in outer hexes. And we have to pre-designate their target stack, and it will be the 2 Austrian cavalry units in 0403. And the French 8-pounder in area 0606 will also conduct ranged fire against the sole cavalry unit, which is in 0506. So in this example, we start with the artillery unit in 0502. It has its target 2 areas away. It needs 9 or more to hit. And the roll is a 9, so it secures a hit. The owning player chooses which of the units in the stack will suffer the hit. There's a priority rule that forces the owning player to choose undisrupted infantry over cavalry, and undisrupted cavalry over undisrupted artillery, and if not, then disrupted infantry over disrupted cavalry, and disrupted cavalry over disrupted artillery. In this case, both units are cavalry, so the owning player chooses to flip the topmost cavalry unit to its disrupted side. We place a range fire marker over the firing artillery unit. Now we roll for the 16-pounder, which is in the area of the town of Lusingen. Because the target is in an area adjacent to the firing unit, it needs 8 or more to secure a hit. So we roll 2d6, and the roll is a 5, so that is a miss. And a ranged fire marker is placed on the firing artillery unit. Now we fire the French artillery unit, the 8-pounder, which is in area 606. It has an enemy cavalry unit adjacent to it. It also needs 8 or more in order to score a hit, but it rolls a 7, so it also misses. We place a range fire marker on the firing unit. Now, bear in mind that in ranged fire, artillery can fire over friendly or enemy units, but it cannot fire over areas that contain woods or towns, or over an area containing ground that is higher than the firing unit. And range fire can be conducted against areas that contain woods or towns, but bear in mind that when doing so, the die result is subject to a -2 die roll modifier. Now let's go to the orders, tactical movement, and combat phase, and all these work together. You have to successfully roll for a stack of units to be able to receive an order by which they can conduct tactical movement and any combat generated by such movement. Let's take a look at certain principles associated with this phase. The active player may order some or all units in a given stack to undertake a tactical move. For artillery, cavalry, and infantry, a tactical move can involve simply moving from one hex in an area to another hex in the same area. Cavalry and infantry can also move tactically from the central hex of one area to the central hex of an adjacent area. Cavalry that moves tactically is permitted to move within an area and from there to an adjacent area. Each side is given a basic order value that represents the cohesion and discipline of its troops. And in this game, the Allied order value is 3 and the Franco-Bavarian order value is 2. Now the game uses these orders modifier markers because you may be rolling for orders more than once during the phase, and that only happens if you successfully roll for orders the first time. Then you can roll again for another stack a second time, but the caveat, the penalty is that the second time that you roll for orders, there is a -1 applied to the order value. And if you successfully roll the second time for orders, then you can roll a third time for another stack, but then the penalty is -2. Let me show you how this works. The orders modifier starts in the space shown for the basic orders value. So for the Allies, it's in the number 3 space. Let's say the Allies want to activate the stack that is in area 0203. We would roll these 2 d6s, which are differently colored. The white die acts as a positive die and the red die as the negative die. And then we would add or subtract whatever number appears here in the track. So if it's the first order to be rolled for the Allied player, he would have a +3. So we roll both dice. If the white die roll adjusted by adding the order's value is equal to or greater than the red die roll, then the order is implemented and the move proceeds as planned. If the result is not higher than the red die roll, then the movement and combat part of the player's turn comes to an end and we proceed to the morale phase. So let's suppose that order is implemented and that stack moves, then the Allied player can nominate another stack, but now the order's modifier is a -1. That moves the marker to the +2 box. Dice are rolled and we add the +2 to the white 4 for a 6, which is greater than the red 4, so the orders are carried out. Now let's say we want to activate another stack, but now we only have a +1 die roll modifier. We roll the dice, +1 plus the white die roll of 2 gives 3, which is not greater than the red die roll of 6, so the orders are not carried out, and this ends this phase. Okay, so in this example, the Allies will give an order to both the cavalry and infantry unit in area 0405. And the order will be an attack order against the 2 French cavalry units that are presently in area 0505. So we place the orders modifier marker for the Allies in the +3 box and we roll 2d6. The result is a white 4, which is added to the +3 for 7, which is greater than the red die roll of 2. So the order is carried out. So next we have to determine the aggregate defense value of the defending units in 0505, and then the aggregate attack value of the attackers, which are in 0405. For the defense aggregate value, we start with the combat strength of both cavalry defending units. Each has a strength of 4 for a total of 8. Now note that one of the cavalry units is in an outer hex, which is adjacent to the area from which the attack is coming from. And as you can see, each undisrupted unit that is located on one of the 2 outer hexes through which the attack is launched provides a +2 to the aggregate defense value of the area. So that cavalry unit in the outer area provides a +2 modifier. So the total aggregate value of the area for defense is 10. Now we calculate the total attack value. And we start with the combat strengths of the attacking units. The infantry is 5, cavalry is 4, for an attack value of 9. But let's check now the possible modifiers. And here we see in the attack value modifiers table that cavalry and infantry that are attacking together provide a +4 attack value modifier. So that means that the aggregate attack value is now 13. No other modifiers apply. The next step now is that we have the attack and defense values at this time with fractions rounded down. So the 13 now becomes a 6, and the defensive value of 10 is 5. Next step is now to roll 1d6 for each of the sides. And the reason we only roll 1d6 for each side is because there are no commanders involved in the battle. If there was any of the Franco-Bavarian commanders involved, because they are experienced, there would be a roll of 2 dice, and the Franco-Bavarian player would select the highest die as their result. In the case of the Allied player, both Eugene and Marlborough are rated as exceptional leaders, so they would roll 3 dice, and you would select the highest die result. But in this particular example, there's no commanders involved, so each side rolls 1 die. So the Franco-Bavarians roll a 6. We add it to the 5 for a total of 11. And the Allies roll a 3. When added to the 6, a total of 9. So the final result is 11 for the defenders, 9 for the attackers. The side with the higher value wins, so the defenders, the French here, are the winners of this battle. Now the difference between the two final values is 2, and the winning side inflicts half of that value as hits on the losing side. So the half of 2 is 1, so the Allies suffer 1 hit, and that means flipping one of their units to their disrupted side. Allies flip the cavalry unit, that unit suffers a hit, it is disrupted, and the infantry unit remains at full strength and in good order. Now we determine how many hits does the losing side inflict on the winning side, and the formula is half of the number of hits that were inflicted on the losing side, and we round fractions down. Well, the losing side received 1 hit, so the winning side receives 0 hits, but that is modified by a die roll. So we roll 1d6, and on a 1 or 2, the loss amount is reduced by -1. 3, 4, or 5, no effect, and on a 6, there's an adjustment of +1 to the number of hits. Right now we're at 0, so we roll 1d6, and the French roll a 6, so it is adjusted by a +1, so they receive 1 hit. They have to disrupt one of their cavalry units, and they disrupt the unit in the central hex of the area. As to retreating, in this case the defenders were victorious, so the attacking units remain where they are in the central hex of their area. So we finish this battle. We place a defend marker on the attacked area, because an area can be attacked more than once during this phase, and there's a penalty. That is a favorable die roll modifier for an attacker who attacks units that have been attacked previously in the same phase. Now the Allies activate the stack, which is just 1 cavalry unit in 0506. And it is activated to attack the same area once again, which is 0506. 1705. We have to roll to see if the order is carried out. Remember that this would be the second time we roll. So the order's modifier marker is adjusted one space to the left. Take into account that -1 that occurs every time you roll during the same phase for orders. And the result is a white 4 and a red 5. So it's +2 + 4 is 6, which is greater than the red die, which is 5. So the order is carried out. And this time we'll move the marker to the +1 box for the next time we roll for orders during this phase. So now we start by calculating the aggregate defense value, and we start with the combat strength of the undisrupted unit, which is 4. And we take into account that there's a cavalry unit in an outer hex, which is not adjacent to the area from which the attack is coming from. And that modifier appears in the defense value modifiers table, and it is unfavorable to the defense. For each undisrupted unit other than artillery located on an outer hex other than one of the two through which the attack is launched, there's a -2 die roll modifier. So this reduces the defense value to 2. And now we calculate the aggregate attack value. We start with the combat strength of the attacking cavalry unit, that is 4. And because there were defending units that had been already attacked this turn by different attacking units, there is a +4 modifier that is applied. So now the attack value is an 8. Now the attacking allied cavalry may elect to charge, and that would increase the attack value by +2. And they elect to charge. So now the attack value increases to 10. And the Franco-Bavarians have an option, because they have cavalry in the defending area, which is not disrupted, to countercharge. A successful countercharge has the benefit of nullifying the charge bonus of +2, but only if pistoliers are charging. In this game, only the allied player has pistoliers in the British contingent. And those are the units signified by the George Cross flag, the British units in the game. The Franco-Bavarian cavalry units are all what is known as trotters, and a successful countercharge will only reduce the charge bonus to +1 from its original +2. Now, to successfully countercharge, the countercharging side has to make a successful order die roll. So to determine if the countercharge is successful, we roll both dice, the white and red die, and make an orders check for the French. And the French have a +2 as a starting point for their orders value, plus the white 2 is 4, which is not greater than the red 6. So the countercharge fails. So as we can see, the total attack value before halving is 10 for the Allies, 2 for the French. Now we divide both sides' values by 2, rounding fractions down. So the Allies have an aggregate offensive value so far of 5, the French 1. Now we roll 1d6 for each of the sides. So the Franco-Bavarians rolled a 3 for a total of 4, and the Allies a 4 for a total of 9. So the final result is the Allies have 9, Franco-Bavarians 4. The difference is 5, and the Allies win this battle. Now, half of the difference, rounded down, that will be 2, is the number of hits that the Franco-Bavarians have to sustain. So that would be 9 minus 4, 5. Half of that, rounded down, is 2 hits, but because there's only one unit attacking, The number of hits cannot exceed the number of attacking units, so the Franco-Bavarians sustain 1 hit. And they decide to eliminate the previously disrupted cavalry unit. Now we see how many hits the losing side inflicts on the winning side. We begin with half of 1, which is the number of hits inflicted on the losing side, which is 0.5 rounded down to 0. And we roll 1 die to determine any possible adjustment. The result is a 4, which produces no adjustment, so the allies, the attacking allies, receive no hits. Now, because the final attack value exceeded the final defense value by 4, because the final value in this case, the attack value exceeded the final defense value by more than 4, the defending unit must retreat 2 areas. And the attacking player determines the route that the defending unit will take. So the defending and surviving cavalry unit retreats through area 0604 to area 0704. Now the attacking cavalry unit has the option to advance into area 0505, but because it charged, it must exercise the option. And that concludes the attack. And normally we would continue the example with more orders from other units, including maybe those of Marlborough, but for the purpose of this example, we will now proceed to the next phase, which is the morale phase. Here, disrupted units that belong to the active player, in this example, the allied player, which are in areas containing their commander unit, are now rallied. But in this particular situation, we see that Eugene is in area 0205 with no units there, so he cannot rally any disrupted Austrian units. There's 2 of those. We see the Austrian cavalry unit in 0403, which was disrupted as a result of ranged fire. And we have the other disrupted cavalry unit in 0405, which was disrupted as a result of combat. They remain disrupted. And that's one of the decisions you have to take into account in this game, because the last phase of each turn is the phase where you can move your commanders. So it's an important decision. They can't do everything at once, and you must choose where to place them, whether to provide strategic movement for units in the next turn or to rally disrupted units. Now, during this phase also, other disrupted units that belong to the active player, in this case the allied player, which are in an area adjacent to an area containing an enemy unit, are tested for morale to see if they stay in the game or they rout. And if they rout, they're eliminated from the game. Now, as we can see here, the only disrupted allied unit that is adjacent to enemy units is the cavalry unit in 0403. To see if it routs, first we calculate the negative morale value by adding the number of friendly stacks in the same or adjacent areas which have already routed during this phase to the number of adjacent areas containing undisrupted enemy units. Now, in this particular case, no allied units have routed previously. However, there are 2 adjacent areas, that is 0503, which is where the town of Lutzingen is, and 0504 that contain undisrupted Franco-Bavarian units. So the negative morale value is 2. And we'll mark that with the red die to signify the -2. Now we calculate the positive morale value, and to do that we add the number of undisrupted friendly units that are in the same area to the number of adjacent area containing undisrupted friendly units. Now there's 1 undisrupted friendly unit in the same area, so that is a +1, and there's 1 adjacent area, which is 0303, which contains an undisrupted friendly unit, and that is the artillery unit that you can see there. So the positive morale value is also 2. So the net result is 0, 2 minus 2. And it is adjusted by cross-referencing a roll of 1d6 on the morale adjustment table. If the final result is a negative number, the unit routs and is eliminated. So we're at 0 and we roll 1d6. And the roll is a 4 for an adjustment of +1. So the final result is a positive number, not a negative number. So the unit does not rout and remains in place. And so for purposes of this example of play, that will be the end of the morale phase. That disrupted cavalry unit in 0403 remains there. And then in the next turn, if the commander, Eugene, moves on to that area, he may rally that unit. Otherwise, it stays disrupted, and disrupted units have severe limitations in this game. Now we go to the last phase, which is the command unit movement phase. And during this phase, command units may move according to the rules for strategic movement, which we covered previously. If moving solely by road and not starting or entering an area immediately adjacent to an area containing an enemy unit, a command unit may move up to 10 areas. Otherwise, it can move a maximum of 6 areas. So in this particular example, Prince Eugene of Savoy will move 3 areas to reach area 0203. And that with that movement, what the Austrians will be doing in the next turn, obviously, is to move those 2 units and the 2 infantry units that are to the left using strategic movement, and even the artillery unit that is in 0303 may be able to conduct strategic movement. Now this concludes this extended example of play. We've shown you various of the mechanics that are used in this game. The Battle of Blenheim, the first of the 7 hex system. So I hope that this video has given you an idea of the flow of the game and what the game and the system has to offer. This is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.